I have a very love-hate relationship, a very complicated, let's say, relationship with All Elite Wrestling. And I want to talk about what it is, how I truly feel about this company. Because depending on what video you watch or what tweet you choose to read or the algorithm feeds you, one person could see my opinion on AEW and say, damn, this guy doesn't really like AEW. And then whenever you watch a pay-per-view review or something cool does happen on AEW, I acknowledge it, and some folks only see that, and then they say I'm an AEW fanboy. It's the stupid, immature, black and white thinking from these online new wrestling fans. And the reality is, in the real world, most people aren't just black and white when it comes to wrestling, and most people really don't care about the initials of the company as long as the product is good. That's what makes you a real fan. In AEW's case, as I mentioned, I have a love-hate relationship because I love AEW's talent. I love AEW's pay-per-views. I love some of the things they do on their weekly shows, but there is a gloomy darkness surrounding AEW. There is a cloud of darkness that continues to surround this company, and that cloud is the CEO and founder of the company, Anthony Khan. And I want to talk about how I went from point A to point B when it comes to AEW. So first, I got to go back to 2018. I did not go to All In. I knew All In was happening. I had friends go. I did not go, and I regretted it because All In looked like a pretty good show. I think I was working that night. I honestly don't remember. But I did not get to go to All In, and, I saw it at home. And then I started hearing, before it was even public, I got a buddy of mine in the business who told me that there's a new wrestling company that's coming out because of the success of All In, ran by the family that owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, because I don't follow the NFL as far as who's the managers and who the owners are, I had no idea who the Khan family was, so I had to do my homework, found out that Shahid Khan, the father, the billionaire, he came over to the United States from, I believe, Pakistan, and pretty much made himself a success. And a lot of folks have issues with billionaires, and I get it. I get it. For me, if you're a self-made millionaire or billionaire, I have some respect for you. Granted, some of these guys, got there using shady tactics or cutthroat business, acumen. Ultimately, that's not what this video is about. I do respect the fact that this man actually got to being wealthy from being broke. Rags to riches is always a cool story. However, Tony Khan has never had to struggle a day in his life, and it becomes more and more obvious every single week, seemingly, when you see the stuff that AEW does and the things that he says and the way he behaves. We'll talk more about that later. But when AEW was first announced, I was a day oneer. I was on board. I was excited because I knew what was happening. I knew the players. I was excited hearing that they might get on Turner Networks, and it turns out they actually did. And I was really hyped because it gave a bunch of new wrestlers that people had never seen before on television a chance to have their talents be seen by the biggest audience ever. Guys like Kenny Omega, who you have to remember from 2016 to 2018, he was like the MVP as far as having great matches. There was about to be a lot of new eyeballs on a lot of AEW's talent. Kenny Omega is just one example. The Young Bucks finally get to be back on television and get to actually be the Young Bucks and not Generation Me. A bunch of guys from the independent or some of the lower companies were finally going to get a shot to show their talents. And it was going to be an alternative product. I remember seeing an interview with Tony Khan and Chris Van Vliet. And if you haven't seen this interview, I suggest you seek it out. Because if you listen to what Tony Khan says in that interview, you would think that that man was kidnapped by a space alien and that the Tony Khan that we have now is a different person. Literally everything that Tony Khan said in that interview from back in 2019, before AEW even started officially on television, the things Tony was saying about how he didn't want to have a giant roster, he didn't want to make the same mistakes WCW made, he didn't want to pay talent too much money. Literally, it's Tony Khan became the exact opposite of what he said he wasn't going to do. I actually believed him back then. And you have to understand, it does feel like this is a different person because I didn't get to go to All In. I mentioned that. I also didn't get to go to Double or Nothing, and I do regret that because a lot of my friends went, and I would have loved to have gone to that show. But I did get to go to All Out, which is AEW's second pay-per-view since becoming a company, and I loved it. I went as press. It was a fun time. And then at the end of the show, when the pay-per-view is off the air, Tony Khan comes out, and he's dressed in a suit with a tie, and he grabs the mic and he tells everybody in Chicago, he's like, I have a long history. My family does here in Illinois. We went to the university here. I've always, loved this city. So I think we're going to make All Out a tradition. He said it very calmly and very cool, and everybody cheered. This is the exact opposite of the Tony Khan we have now, where every time he comes out to address the public, he's always trying to be a hype man. And it comes off like he's trying too hard. You know what I'm talking about, right? Tonight we're going to have Sammy Guevara against Eddie Kingston. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a hype man, but he's just not very good at it. And I really liked the Tony Khan professional in the way he was dressed, professional in the way that he spoke in 2019. It genuinely feels like a different person. Now, 2019 WWE, especially Raw, was horrible. But you know what wasn't horrible? NXT. NXT was phenomenal in 2019. So when Dynamite was announced as being, on Wednesday nights and WWE moved NXT to Wednesday nights, I was excited. I was super excited because it wasn't a remake of the Monday Night War. That is not what this was. It was the Wednesday Night War with WWE's C talent or C, brand, I guess you can call it. No disrespect to, I love NXT, but it wasn't as big as Raw and SmackDown as far as viewership goes. They were going to put it on USA to compete with AEW. And both shows kind of had similar audiences. They were more tailored for the hardcore wrestling fan. You had a lot of great workers in AEW, including the shocking debut of Jon Moxley, who it was fresh when he came out. A huge shocker. I mean, the dude was on WWE with the Shield, having that little show, that the end of the Shield show or whatever, before he left, like a month prior, if not like 3 weeks. It wasn't very long, and it was exciting. It was exciting. Now, as much as NXT was phenomenal back then with guys like Adam Cole, Gargano, Keith Lee, Donovan Dijakovic, Kabuki Warriors were on that show, Prince Devitt, a.k.a. Finn Balor, had moved over. Like, both shows delivered, but I will say, I found myself enjoying Dynamite more. There's no question that in 2019, Dynamite was the better show of the two, in my opinion. And actually, I think Dynamite was the best wrestling show of 2019. The only problem is it was only on the air for about 2 or 3 months. That's it. You understand what I'm saying? And because it wasn't on the air that long, overall, NXT was probably a better show as far as the entire year went, but Dynamite had come in like a bat out of hell, and everyone was excited. We had packed arenas again. Everything was fresh. People were seeing these moves for the first time. It felt good. It felt like wrestling was actually expanding. It felt like this, unlike TNA, was real competition, because guys like Cody Rhodes and Kenny Omega are very, very staunch wrestling historians. I don't know if better or worse than Tony Khan, but the difference is that Cody Rhodes' father was in the business and is a legitimate legend in wrestling, whereas Tony Khan's dad knows nothing about wrestling. He admitted that himself. He's doing it for his son. That's why he gave him the inheritance early. So I believe, and if you really look at the booking, I think Cody Rhodes was a major reason as to why AEW was so good in the early years. I'm not sure if he was straight up booking the whole show. I've always heard it's a collaborative effort with the Elite, including Cody, Jericho, and Tony Khan back then. but the show felt completely different. Every segment mattered. The roster back then versus now, obviously there's way more talent now, but back then the roster was, dare I say, a little bit better because it was smaller and thus you had better time to manage your talent and give them television time. On AEW now, their roster is so big and bloated that people just disappear all the time and it's never explained. It used to happen once in a while, but now it becomes a thing where we see it over and over again, where characters will appear for a couple weeks or even a month, then disappear, then come back in a month with no explanation. And that's the curse of having a giant roster and a booker who's not that talented. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. So then in 2020 came the pandemic, and I will say this. In my opinion, even though wrestling was completely unbearable to watch in 2020 because I just didn't like it, wrestling without fans is not wrestling, and Monday Night Raw became maybe the worst show it's ever been. Like, there were episodes of Raw during the pandemic that I turned off an hour in. And you have to understand, I would never have done that back in the day. But just the shows felt so empty and just wrestling was not in a good place during the pandemic. However, if I were to judge how WWE handled it versus AEW, I think AEW had the better shows. And I think if you look at 2020 and 2019, those 2 years, I do think AEW was better than WWE. I do think so, in my opinion. And really 2020 WWE was horrible. I mean, just really bad. And I think that AEW handled the pandemic better. So Tony Khan winning Booker of the Year for 2020 made sense to me because WWE had sucked so bad. It became one of those situations where it wasn't because AEW had groundbreaking booking, even though it was solid back then. It was because WWE had sucked so bad that we're out of choices. You know what I mean? We were out. At that point, I felt like the bloom was off the rose with New Japan for a lot of fans. And the reason why they probably didn't win Best Booker or Promoter that year is because of so much talent that they lost because of the existence of AEW, right? Unfortunately, New Japan, while I thought it was still great in 2019, and I actually went to Wrestle Kingdom in 2020, AEW became the new kid on the block, and thus Tony Khan won Booker of the Year. But now is where we start getting into, okay, what's going on here? Because the first sign that this situation, and this is somewhat in hindsight, but I also thought it was weird back then. The first sign that we were dealing with a potential problem with this company is when AEW and Tony Khan won Promotion of the Year and Booker of the Year, and he had a banister in his building for it. Now, look, I've respected Dave Meltzer as far as a historian and everything for most of my life. And I'm not saying the awards don't matter, but as a promoter of a company, number one, I understand that Tony as a kid was an observer reader, so him winning that award was like a dream come true. I get it. I get all that. But it's like what CM Punk said in the Ariel Helwani show. If you're focused more on star ratings than drawing money, and at the time I didn't think much of it, but that was kind of our first sign that Tony Khan might not be in this for the same reason others are. And as a promoter, it's one thing to be proud of winning an award, but we would soon find out that this award meant a lot more to the guy than we had thought back then. And we also found out that AEW as a whole, with interviews coming out, month by month from Tony, is a project that he had wanted to do since he was a kid. Like, he loved wrestling, and with All In doing how much success it did, 10,000 tickets sold without any television, Tony Khan was like, hey, we might be in business here. So the initial idea was that they were going to put a lot of the Khan's money into the company and eventually earn it back with live events and with television rights deals and pay-per-views. All that made sense. But then we started to see cracks. During Revolution 2021, the worst finish to a pay-per-view, well, it really wasn't, because Hell in a Cell 2019 with The Fiend and Seth Rollins, that's the worst ending to a pay-per-view ever. And not to mention that fans were chanting AEW at that show. So the Revolution was beginning and there was a lot of momentum behind AEW. So at 2021's Revolution show, it ended with the exploding barbed wire match. and it was garbage. It was a couple of little sparkler fireworks, and that's it. Became the laughing stock of the internet. I remember Tony Khan came out himself, not through EVPs or through like anybody else. Tony Khan himself was complaining about the fan backlash. And that's already bad. And I've said this a million times on this channel. If you blame the fans for your own failure, that is a massive, massive failure on your part to do that. It's a bad idea. It's bad business. And it leaves the fans not really liking you. But that wasn't enough for the fans to hate him, because his points were, well, did you think we were going to blow up a ring for real? And it's like, well, of course not. But if you watch any of the Onita exploding barbed wire matches from Japan, from FMW, they are on YouTube, some of them. Their explosions actually looked like explosions. They had some real dangerous stuff. And I understand not wanting to put your roster in danger. I get it. But if that's the case, don't book the match. It's better that you book like a regular no DQ or a ladder match or something different than book an exploding match that's going to be a laughing stock for your company. But I thought to myself, okay, well, it's a learning experience, and they probably will never do that again. Later in 2021 is when things started getting good for AEW. They started picking up new talent, Andrade, Malachi Black. They really benefited a lot from Miro. The pandemic releases from WWE, they really benefited a lot from them. And then they picked up Adam Cole, Bryan Danielson, and of course, CM Punk. At this point, the summer of 2021 going into the fall, AEW was probably the most fun it had ever been and had the most momentum it ever had. People were really into AEW. They got a bunch of new fans thanks to CM Punk. And now they had gotten out of retirement a guy who people have wanted to see for years and years. So at this point, AEW is good. It's gravy. Also, while this was going on, you had guys getting pushes like Jungle Boy with Luchasaurus was in the spotlight, being, aligned with Christian. You had, this is the four pillars. You had MJF out there feuding with Jericho, and later Pillman Jr. and later Darby Allin, the other one of the pillars who had teamed up with Sting around this time. And things were going well. Britt Baker was the champion, probably the peak of her career. But then it feels like things started to get a little weird. So there was a tournament for Full Gear. And it was supposed to be a number one contenders tournament. But CM Punk wasn't in the tournament, along with a bunch of other guys who deserved it. And I didn't understand that. I did not understand that. And that's something that's even going on today with their tag team tournament booking. Jon Moxley and Claudio win a match over FTR, but they're not in this tournament. There's a lot of Tony Khan and his tournaments, man. But let me not digress. Let me keep going with the story. So the tournament was already weird, but AEW was still hot. I mean, you had All Out, huge show, massive show, biggest one in company history. Arthur Ashe started that year. Full Gear was solid. It paid off the Hangman Page Kenny Omega feud that had been built up for like 2 years. And things were going in a good direction. Going into 2022, CM Punk was feuding with MJF, and Bryan was feuding with Hangman Page, and then that became Hangman Page and Adam Cole. Then we get to Revolution 2022. I was there live, and to this day, it's my favorite AEW pay-per-view I've been to. Every match delivered. All the talent had plenty of match time. Like, everything mattered. I love that show. I absolutely love Revolution 2022. And at this point, even though WWE had still been doing the Bloodline, it was still under Vince McMahon. So it wasn't quite to the levels it got when he stepped down in middle of 2022, the first time, that is. But it was improving little by little, but I still loved AEW's shows more. Not only did I go to Revolution, I also went to Double or Nothing and Forbidden Door. And both those shows were a lot of fun. And I was doing AEW shows monthly, almost monthly. So it's one of those things where people will read me saying something mean about Tony and forget how much I supported that motherfucker. Because I liked the product at the time. Of course, what we didn't know was that behind the scenes, things were about to get messy, because this is right around the time that CM Punk was feuding with Hangman, and that's what started all of this. But we didn't know that at the time. So CM Punk gets hurt and AEW Summer's kind of shit. And I start seeing holes in Tony Khan's booking little by little. Things that don't make any sense, logic mistakes, lack of characters doing things that are characteristic to them. Lots of like weird positioning with things. Like, this is when I started to really realize that I don't know if Tony Khan used up all his good ideas from the first 3 years the company was in business, or if he just didn't know what he was doing, or if he was trying new stuff. But you slowly started to see questionable decisions being made in AEW. Things that are mistakes, but nevertheless not catastrophic ones. While all this was going on, Tony Khan, little by little, started saying things that were completely out of pocket. CM Punk and Tony Khan were saying that Bryan and him jumping over was bigger than Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. Sorry, it wasn't at all. They changed the business forever. Like, no, it wasn't. And Tony Khan started saying that, you know, he didn't want to put up with WWE's bullshit. This is around All Out time. We're going to get there in a minute. And that he has more money than Jim Crockett, and that he knows more than Ted Turner. And it's like, when you start gloating or saying things like putting yourself over like legitimate, like, first of all, you're on the Turner Network. Second of all, you don't know Ted Turner. Third of all, people keep saying that Tony's a smart businessman and knows wrestling. But if he actually understood Ted Turner and WCW, he would know that Ted Turner himself had very little to do with WCW failing at all. So him saying he knows more than Ted Turner, and that if he were running WCW, it would have still been in business. Now in 2024, that looks even dumber. And that's what happens when his ego starts to slowly manifest itself. Now, I was having conversations in private with my friends and people in my Discord server about Tony Khan's behavior and how off-putting it was. There's a lot of things that I don't like in this world, and one of them is silver spoon babies. Because silver spoon babies, that is, kids that are born into money, are oftentimes very, and this is something I've experienced, they're very pampered, they're very childish, they've never dealt with real confrontation or real consequences because they're wealthy. What do they have to worry about? They have no idea what it's like to struggle, and they also have a weird, bizarro, twisted view of the world. When you're super wealthy like that, it does, and you grow up in wealth, it can cause some major issues when it comes to development, meaning like your psychological development. It becomes harder to relate to the average person or the people because of how wealthy you are, because you've never experienced the same things they've experienced. And I started to get worried because I did not want AEW to end up like TNA, where for the first couple of years they looked like, they were the little engine that could. They looked like people, they could actually, maybe not compete with WWE, but offer a good alternative, a different kind of show. And then here in AEW, it is a different kind of show, but in many ways it wasn't better. And then we have to remember that in the summer of 2022, when Vince McMahon stepped down and Paul Levesque took over from creative officially, little by little, slowly but surely, the product began to change and to improve. And that's kind of led to where we're at right now, where we're having all these consistent sellouts and these big numbers, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so then comes All Out. Just the fact that CM Punk did what he did. Look, I'm not here to pick sides, because the reality is that everybody's unprofessional. But in this YouTube channel, I talked about just how unprofessional Punk was to air out that dirty laundry in front of press. And the real thing I also mentioned in that video was how Tony Khan could just sit there and take it. He just sat there and just nodded his head like he agreed. CM Punk is burying the executive vice presidents of this company, and Tony Khan sitting there nodding. What does that say about your loyalty to these men or your control over any of these guys? You don't have to. I'm not saying TK should have gotten up and smacked them, because he would never do that. Because something else about these rich kids, they don't know confrontation. They don't want to deal with confrontation. This is why so many people have talked about how, Tony Khan never fired me, my contract expired. He doesn't like calling people and saying, hey, you're terminated. He doesn't like doing any of that. CM Punk himself even said that when they fired him, he didn't even get to talk to Tony Khan on the phone. Tony Khan goes on television and announces it without even having a conversation with the man himself. It's so scummy. And that's the following year. But the reality is that going into AEW, I was behind AEW because it seemed like something genuine. And come to understand that this guy, Tony Khan, has serious emotional problems, serious maturity issues. He's a big baby, and he's a wall cow, and he made himself that. And this is when we started to see the cracks. The way he behaved after the brawl out incident where he wouldn't talk about it to anybody. Now, I understand the NDAs got signed, but you're not even going to give a storyline reason about what happened with the world title and with the trios title. He just appeared on TV and said that, the titles are vacant with no reason as to why, as if everyone watching the show just happens to know the internet and know what happened. This is why you freaking piss off your audience by doing things like that. And then we slowly started to see a lot of cracks in his booking, and also his interviews became such horrible wank fest. When somebody would ask him a serious question about something in the company, he would deflect it and then go on to promote the show and say it was great and we had a great show for you tonight. Like, it just became really obnoxious. And I don't think he even has the self-awareness to understand how annoying he is and how much of a detriment he's been to that company. Because, dude, from 2019 to 2022, I was going to AEW shows, supporting AEW, wanting that little engine that could to be legitimate competition. But little by little, when you see the cracks, you start to learn that this guy ain't it. He ain't it. He might think he's it. Dave Meltzer might tell him he's it. He's not it. He's not it, folks. The only way AEW will actually turn a profit, which is supposed to be the goal of any business, not just as a playground, but actually turn a profit, is if this dude steps down. And he's not going to, because the more time goes by, the more you start to realize that this company exists as a tax write-off, and B, a playground for Tony Khan. He wants to book these fantasy matches, and it's crazy because I was making these comments, albeit in a much nicer way, privately, and thinking these things, and now I see all these guys from Jim Cornette to Eric Bischoff. I'm not saying that they copied me, because they didn't, because they weren't there for these conversations. That I would never have that kind of an ego to assume that. They probably have no idea who I am. But that's not the point. The point is that I saw other people saying the same thing. And you could easily sit there and say, well, Bischoff's bitter and Jim Cornette hates the Young Bucks, whatever you want to make up. But I found myself agreeing with the criticism itself. Not necessarily the beef that Cornette has with Nick and Matt or any of that garbage. It's more so the mentality, the philosophy behind these men and how they see pro wrestling. That's not, and Tony Khan's version of pro wrestling is just to pop the message boards. There's no stories, or at least the stories are either too simple or they don't ever actually continue. People disappear off the show all the time with no explanation. The roster's way too big. Ring of Honor exists purely because Tony Khan was a mark for Ring of Honor when he was younger, and now he bought it. That's the only reason it exists. Ring of Honor is a money pit. Nobody buys Honor Club, dude. Maybe 100 people. Nobody stays when they go to these tapings for Ring of Honor. Nobody does, man. They leave. They don't care. And it's too bad, because there's a lot of talent there. But, and let's not forget that Khan is allegedly booking all this stuff. And as much as I respect his grind and his hard work, it's a lot to book 4 wrestling shows a week. You got to get a crew to help you. And then more and more, I started seeing things that just resembled, like playing EWR. The storylines didn't continue. Like, they oftentimes would end abruptly or be dropped, and there'd be nothing clever about continuing them. Oftentimes you have matches just because they'll be good matches for no reason other than that, which is okay to do once in a while, but American pro wrestling is not the same as Japanese pro wrestling in the sense of American pro wrestling is much more like a soap opera than Japanese wrestling. Japanese wrestling, typically, there's obviously outliers like DDT and things like that, but New Japan, All Japan is usually about athleticism, like more sports-based athleticism, a little bit of wacky, but they're more like that than WWE's sort of soap opera vignettes in the back and that type of stuff that WWE, TNA, and even AEW did. And so it just feels like more and more that this idea that people have been pushing, whether it be from Meltzer's camp, that Tony Khan is smart, he's a very smart guy. I don't think so. He's not that smart. Clearly. They dunked him up a bunch of money in the video game. It didn't do well. He's spending a bunch of money on talent that isn't drawing for him. Edge, Sasha Banks / Mercedes Moné, Will Ospreay, Okada have meant nothing to the ratings. And that's not because they're not stars. And it's not because they aren't talented. WCW proved that you could have all the star power in the world, but if you can't book, if you don't put the stars in interesting situations and interesting storylines, it's not going to matter. Doesn't matter who you sign. It doesn't matter how many star ratings you get in the dirt sheet or whatever, or what the internet thinks about you. People who are casual fans are the lifeblood of wrestling. I am not a casual fan. I am a hardcore fan, and I'm telling you that. Casual fans are only a select few. If you want to bring in, and there's layers to this. It's not just there's casual and there's hardcore. There's different levels of casual and hardcore. But the point is, people want to be invested in good story, whether it be wrestling, whether it be real sports, or whether it be movies and books and video games. People want good stories. AEW has had 2 good stories in the entirety of the company, in my opinion. CM Punk and MJF was a great feud, and the story with the Elite. The one going back with Hangman in 2019, then him and Kenny being a team, and the Young Bucks. That whole story that was blown off at Full Gear, and they reunited for Double or Nothing 2023. Yeah, that one. I was got to make sure I got those years right. All those stories are the ones that they did the best. But so many others just haven't worked. The Christian and Edge thing is okay. I enjoy it. Like there's good stuff. I'm not saying the whole show is crap, because it's not. It's not like a horrible show every single week, but it's just not improving. It's not growing. And if you're not growing, you're dying in television. That's the truth. And the buildings are empty. People aren't going to your shows. Why is WWE doing so well and AEW isn't? It's because of story. The Bloodline, Cody Rhodes' story, finishing the story, the Rhea Ripley journey, Judgment Day, Sami Zayn trying to get the Intercontinental. These are all stories, and they got over. Not everything WWE does gets over, but I don't think Tony Khan has a damn clue what he's doing. I don't think he has a clue what he's doing. I don't think he knows how to put together a TV show. I think he might know how to book a good house show. He knows how to find talent. Like, as far as a talent scout goes, that he is good at. Most of it's from the internet community that he gets his ideas from, but it doesn't matter. Like, the guy is good at recruiting and signing talent and paying them maybe too much money. But he does these media scrums where he powders his fucking pussy, and he never takes any criticism from anybody who's been in the business. He'll listen to like Tranquilo Club and guys like that, and just his behavior is just so annoying to me. Like, AEW would be better if Tony Khan would just stay as a silent owner. Have somebody else be the authority figure, whether it be Nick and Matt. Have somebody else do the scrums. Basically, Tony Khan would work better as being like Nick Khan, because he's not a good booker. He's good at negotiating deals for buildings. At least I think he is. I don't know for sure about that either, because we don't know. It's a private company. He might be blowing money on that too. But the point is, every time he's on television, he looks awkward and weird. He doesn't have confidence. You can tell he's kind of introverted. And if that's not your skill set, bro, don't try to force it to be. You know? Don't try to force it to be. His job should be, if you want to do dream matches, if that's really what you want, if you can't let go and you have to do your dream matches, get a creative team together with some writers and tell them, I want to see Will Ospreay versus Shane Strickland or whatever at All In. What could the story be? That's the match I want. What could the story be? And then let the writers kind of brainstorm ideas, and then you have 4, 5, 6 months of story they can come up with. And if you have to change it, you can change it, because obviously injuries happen, guys get over, etc. Things happen, scandals happen, but hopefully not. But the point is, that's how it should be done. He tries to book the shows week to week, and he's just not a good booker. Nobody watches Rampage. Collision, like, very few people that I know watch Collision. They'll watch the replay of some of the matches, but it's actually more boring than Dynamite on most weeks. And you have to understand, Bryan Danielson is one of my favorite wrestlers, and I don't even watch for him. And that should tell you something. But also, there's too much wrestling on TV as it is. So when I say I have a love-hate relationship with AEW, this is what I mean. I love the talent. I love it that it exists so the guys can get paid. I love the matches, and I love some of the angles and the promos. It's a lot of fun. I also dislike Tony Khan anytime he appears online because he comes off so obnoxious and so bratty. I don't think he's a good leader. He could have gotten the CM Punk Elite thing resolved multiple times and didn't, because he doesn't know how to do it. He's not a good leader. He's not a good boss. Like CM Punk says, he's a nice guy. And the reality is, the wrestlers do not respect him. This is a fact. I was told this back in 2021 by a different person that works in that company besides CM Punk. When I heard CM Punk say, oh, he's not a boss, he's a nice guy on the Helwani show. I had people telling me back then, like, listen, he's a nice guy. We're here getting paid. I'm just going to let him do what he wants. There's tons of guys in that company who don't agree with his booking, who think AEW should go in a different direction, but they just don't say anything because A, it won't matter. It won't change his mind. And B, they're getting paid anyways. And he's forking out tons and tons and tons of thousands, millions of his dad's money, millions, to fund this company. And I'm glad it exists for us. I don't really care about their bank account because none of my business. But the company's losing money. They've never made a profit. You should be in the business. If you want to run a wrestling company and book matches, that's fine. But your number one goal should be to make money back, because then you can prove that you can be a competent businessman without having your dad there. But I'll be honest, if this keeps up, the company will never go under. But if this keeps up, it makes me wonder if Tony Khan should actually take over his dad's businesses when his dad passes away, because this guy is not very good at running a business. Let's not forget that even the Jacksonville Jaguars, there have been complaints about the management teams there. So now I sit back and I wonder, what's up with these people? Like, what are they really bad at everything? Clearly not. His dad's supposed to be sharp as a tack. But the kid is the laughingstock of wrestling, and it's his fault. People are saying it now. I've been saying it for a long time. It's his fault. I want to love AEW. I want to support AEW. Tony Khan makes it hard. In his interviews, the way he behaves on Twitter, this motherfucker's in his 40s doing ratio. Ratio, you know that thing on Twitter, ratio, which is like shit that like 8th graders do. Ratio, I got more likes than you. It's such loser fucking 9-year-old shit. This dude's in his 40s doing ratio. Like, really, bro? Like, do you know, like, Eric Bischoff said he's 40 turning 12, and that's how he comes off. He's a little bratty kid who's mad that CM Punk told the truth basically about his company, and his idea to get him back was, I'm going to show how mean CM Punk was to Jack Perry and how mean and how much of a problem he was to our locker room. Maybe he was, but you enabled it. Maybe he was, but that's your fault. And until he gets there, he actually feels that acceptance that it was his fault, it's never going to change. I no longer think AEW is going to change. Not with Tony in charge. I don't think it's going to get better. I really don't. And I still watch Dynamite every week, but there may come a time where I end up pushing it aside for other things. There may come a time where I end up skipping some Dynamites and just reading up the results or, watching clips later on because it's getting boring and I care less and less every week. And the stunts they tried to pull recently are just left a very bad taste in my mouth. And it's hard to do that because I love wrestling. And I'm still going to watch Dynasty. I'm still going to do a review on Dynasty here on the channel. I'm still going to do all those things. But, dude, Tony Khan is AEW's worst nightmare. He really is. The creator of the company, the guy who funds it, is the reason. That's why Randy Orton calls him Jacksonville Dixie. That's the reason why this company's not growing. He has no idea what he's doing. He can't control his emotions. And it's hard to support a company that treats other wrestlers. Let's not forget that disrespect he had for Cena and The Undertaker when he went head-to-head with NXT. Like, the dude doesn't even know what the hell he's saying, bro. He doesn't even realize the things he says and how they come off. And that's a real problem. That's a real problem. It's just you don't want to support somebody like that. A billionaire, bro, he's already got plenty of money. Plenty of money. So, it is what it is, man. That is my love and hate relationship with AEW. Pay-per-views, I love. TV is garbage. Tony Khan is not a good booker. He can't put together a TV show to save his life. And until he steps down, we're stuck with this. So, it is what it is.